In Colombia, the second round of presidential elections are underway. The turnout of the Andalusian autonomous election in Spain reached over 34%. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported the destruction of a command center in Ukraine. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Colombia, the second round of elections that will define the next president of that country has begun. Gustavo Petro of the historical pact and Rodolfo Hernandez of the League of Anti-Corruption Rulers come to election day with a technical tie, according to some polls, although order gives an advantage of 10 percentage points to Petro, who represents the alternative and left-wing sectors. Hernandez, on the other hand, although he is not part of any traditional party either, is the bet of the radical sectors of the right, and arrives marked by several accusations against him for corruption crimes. If Petro wins, it will be an unprecedented triumph in the history of the left in Colombia, but if Hernandez achieves victory, the country will have a president supported by right-wing sectors that refuse to suffer an electoral defeat. In Colombia, the presidential candidate for the historical pact, Gustavo Petro, exercised his right to vote. It is a historic moment where no candidate far from the traditional Colombian establishment had ever reached these electoral instances with a chance of winning. In exercising his right to vote, Petro called for a massive participation, avoiding the possible manipulation of votes and achieving a change in the country. He also criticized the decision of the electoral authorities not to review the software destined for the management of the electoral process. The presidential candidate for the League of Anti-Corruption Rulers, Rodolfo Hernandez, cast his vote at the Santander School in the city of Bucaramanga, accompanied by his family and supporters. The candidate took advantage of this moment to call on the entire population of the Department of Santander to go out and vote, and also assure that this day will be positive for the country's democracy. We welcome once more our correspondent Natalia Margarita for the latest updates on Colombia's presidential runoffs. Hello, Natalia.
Hi there, Luis. Well, here in Colombia, we continue to bring you the latest updates of the presidential election. Both presidential candidates already exercised their right to vote. The first one to do so was the conservative candidate, Rodolfo Hernandez, who exercised his right to vote in the city of Bucaramanga. And around 1 hour ago, like 10:30 local time, the progressive candidate, Gustavo Petro, exercised his right to vote right here in this voting station that you can see. After exercising his right to vote, he also said some words to the media. He raised once again, he raised the concern on the lack of an international and independent technical audit of the software for the vote counting. And he also said that the best way to confront any attempt of fraud, electoral fraud, is by massive voting. In this sense, he called all Colombians to go and exercise their right to vote. And he also advised the Colombians that are going to the polls to make sure that there is no the blank the sheet of paper to vote that there is not previously marked. This because they have the campaign of Gustavo Petro has received some denounces regarding that the electoral sheets have been previously marked in the blank vote. So he asked the citizens to make sure that when they receive the electoral sheet is not previously marked.
Thank you, Natalia. We're going to keep informing on this situation in Colombia. Now we move on to other topics. In election day in Colombia, both presidential candidates have said government proposals should they be elected. Let's take a closer look at the historical pact.
Candidate Gustavo Petro and his running mate Francia Marquez of the Historical Pact on Security and Conflict proposed that military service is to be compulsory. relocate the national police under the Ministry of the Interior, and dismantle the Smart Riot Squad. In economic matters, they proposed to activate the agrarian reform established by the final peace agreement and a transition of Colombia from coal and oil to an economy based on renewable energies. Regarding health, they say focus will be on preventive and intercultural health, and that they will abide by the Constitutional Court ruling to decriminalize abortion. In international policy, they have said they will guarantee the rights of the migrant population in Colombia without xenophobia or discrimination, and that they will renegotiate free trade agreements. In the field of human rights, they stated they will create the Ministry of Equality and will guarantee the rights of the LGBTIQ, Afro-descendant, and indigenous communities. In education, they stated they will guarantee universal and comprehensive access to early childhood education for children from birth to 6 years of age, as well as access for young people to free public education at the technological and university levels.
At 62 years old and with 3 attempts to reach the presidency, Gustavo Petro, leader of the historical path, could become the first left-wing president in Colombia, reconstruct the history of the renowned leader marked by threats against his life, exile, and political persecution.
Corrupción se combate arriesgando la vida.
Gustavo Francisco Petro Urrego, born April 19, 1960, in Ciénaga de Oro, Córdoba, is the oldest of 3 children. His father, Gustavo Petro Sierra, and his mother, Nubia Urrego, moved to the municipality of Zipaquirá, Cundinamarca, in 1970, year in which Misael Pastrana Borrero won the presidency of Colombia amid irregularities, giving life to the M19 guerrilla. Petro joined the M19 guerrilla in 1978, where he carried out political work that drove him into hiding. He was captured, tortured, and sentenced to 1.5 years in prison. In 1990, the M19 demobilized and Petro became one of the advisors to the 1991 constituents. Years later, he obtained a degree in economics from the Externado University of Colombia. His political career began in 1981 as an official of Zipaquirá. In 1984, he was a councilman. He became a member of the House of Representatives in 1991, and from there went to the Senate. He was the first congressman to uncover the relationship between politicians and paramilitaries. In 2012, Gustavo Petro became the mayor of Bogotá. From the Palace of Líbano, he denounced the mafias in the waste management business and proposed to change the system by taking power away from the private sector. The implementation of the new model 1 year later cost him the dismissal from his position and inability to hold public office for 15 years. In 2018, the case reached the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which declared the Colombian state responsible for the violation of Gustavo Petro's political rights. The young activist, who joined with other young people to build the Bolívar 83 neighborhood in Zipaquirá, seeks to reach the presidency and consolidate his environmental campaign, a banner that has become the backbone of his government program.
Símbolo al ser del conocimiento de la paz.
And now we have with us live from the South to deepen on Colombia's election day, Raúl Burbano, Director of Common Frontiers. Welcome, Raúl, to From the South.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
No, it's our pleasure. Raúl, many elements come together for this Sunday's presidential runoff. How can we understand the importance of this election day for Colombians and their future, and not only for Colombia, but for the whole region as well?
I think the significance of the elections for Colombia, it can't be understated in terms of the impact it will have on Colombians, but also for the region. Specifically, it would be the first time in Colombian history that a leftist, a progressive government would take power, would implement things like the peace accords that is so needed in Colombia to challenge the economic kind of crisis, the political crisis that Colombia is in, that would have significant impact for Colombians, but also I think internationally it would have, Colombia, it would stop playing a role of being sort of, the supporter of the United States policies of intervention in different countries like in Venezuela and around the region. So it would have a significant impact on the region. And as we see, Latin America has been electing more progressive governments in the region. We would see a stronger integration amongst Latin American countries, and Colombia would be integral to that. And with the election of Gustavo Petro and the progressive forces, that momentum would continue much stronger, and we would see a much more united Latin America, I think, and a much better Colombia, that's for sure.
Surveys ahead of this election day did not show a clear favorite to win, so it's very likely that undecided voters will have an important role to play in the results. What can be the deciding elements that tip the scale to one side or the other?
Well, I mean, I had the opportunity to be in Colombia for the first round a few weeks back, and I traveled across Colombia, and my experience is almost everybody I talked to was very supportive and was voting for change, and for them that change was very clear, that it was El Pacto Histórico. It was, Francia Marcas, Gustavo Petro, the only candidates from the perspective of most Colombians that I met that would bring the change and the transformation that Colombia needs to get Colombia out of, the misery, the poverty, the inequality which is experiencing. And I mean, they were clear. Colombians, when they expressed to me that they would see this as a transitional government. They don't expect that, El Pacto Histórico, if they were to win, would automatically change the country overnight. But if they would implement some basic stuff like access to education, taxing the rich, implementing the peace accords, they would have significant impacts, for example, on women, on Afro-Colombians, on indigenous communities who have been impacted disproportionately by violence and war, in many cases due to the state. So I think things would have a huge impact. We're very concerned, at least from the Common Frontiers perspective and the Electoral Commission that we sent to Colombia, with regards to the state interference in the electoral process. It's very hard to look at the elections in Colombia and from a neutral perspective and say that they are transparent, that they aren't, that they're marred in fraud. I mean, there's many accusations of fraud. The state in the last few days, the police force has gone and arrested a whole bunch of young people who participated in the demonstrations last year. I mean, this type is very anti-democratic, and I think those type of illegal initiatives that are taking place during the electoral process can tip the scales in favor of Hernandez, Rodolfo, and the opposition. And I think that's a really big concern from our perspective, that the government, through its interference in the electoral process, does not tip the scales in favor of the right-wing candidate, Rodolfo Hernandez.
As you were saying, uncertainty has defined this electoral process. The National Registry Office didn't carry out the audit for the international electoral software. Candidate Gustavo Petro denounced after voting almost like an hour ago that ballots are already marked so they can be annulled. What can we expect moving forward on this election day?
I think, Colombia has a history of fraudulent elections, of tampering in the electoral process. We, just recently in the legislative elections, we saw, 500,000 votes were stolen and then had to be recuperated for El Pacto Histórico, the historic pact. So I think Colombians have to go up to vote en masse in order to safeguard the electoral process, whether it's at the voting areas, participating in the electoral process, denouncing on social media. The only way that Colombians can assure themselves of a free, fair, democratic process is by participating in the electoral process en masse. I don't think it's a time for Colombians to sit back and say, politicians are all the same, or the electoral process is good enough for us to support. I think we have to be, as Colombians in the exterior and in the country, have to be sort of on guard and protecting the electoral process, ensuring that every vote that is supposed to go to the progressive candidates, the Pacto Histórico, it goes to them, and there is no fraud. There is lots of claims of fraud. Sometimes I'm sure that some of that is not always the case. But it's clear, at least when I talk to the majority of Colombians during my travels in the last couple of weeks, is Colombians don't have faith in the electoral process, but yet they have faith that they're going to win these elections, and that the Pacto Histórico will be the group that's going to take the presidency. So I think it's really participation en masse of Colombians to ensure and protect their electoral process.
Thank you, Raul, for your time here from the South.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure, and we're so excited. There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm for these elections because, there is a sense of a real big change in Colombia that is really needed. And we're so excited about that change as Colombians who live in the exterior, and I'm sure Colombians who live in the country.
We'll keep informing the people, our audience, on these elections. Raul Burbano, Director of Common Frontiers. We are taking a short break now. Stay with us. Welcome back from the south. The turnout of the Andalusian autonomous elections in Spain on Sunday reached 34.14% at 2:30 p.m. local time. According to data from the autonomous government, the election day has presented an increase of at least 4.3% with respect to the elections held in 2018, and more than 2 million people have voted likewise. The candidates are making a constant call for the participation of citizens to massively go to the polls and exercise their right to vote. For its part, the government of Andalucia stressed that more than 10,600 agents of the civil guard and nearly 6,300 members of the national police are on duty to ensure security at polling stations. In France, the second round of parliamentary elections is underway with a turnout of less than 20% during the first half of the day. As of noon local time, about 19% of registered voters have gone to the polls, which represents an abstention rate of over 50% so far. According to the electoral authorities, the voter turnout is well below that of the April 24th presidential runoff elections, which stood at 26.41%. Polls projected an abstention rate for this runoff elections of around 53%, lower than the record registered in the parliamentary elections 5 years ago, which was over 57%. The legislative elections will define the composition of the 577-seat National Assembly, with the coalitions of the ruling party and the left-wing New Popular Ecological and Social Union as the main favorites. At least 59 people died during the last few days, and millions are affected by heavy monsoon rains hitting northeast India and Bangladesh this week. The worst hit regions are the northeastern Indian states of Meghalaya and Assam, where more than 2.6 million people are affected after 5 straight days of rain. Police officials say lightning killed at least 15 people in 8 Bangladeshi districts since Friday, and 4 people were killed in landslides. The situation worsened on Saturday, with widespread flooding and massive power outage in what is believed to be the worst flooding in Bangladesh in more than 100 years. According to weather forecasts, the flooding is expected to worsen over the next 2 days due to heavy rains. Chinese authorities activate emergency measures to help the population in the midst of the floods affecting several regions of the country. Local authorities in Guizhou in southwest China and Fujian and Zhejiang in eastern China activated emergency flood relief measures, including evacuation of affected residents to safe areas and restoration of vital facilities. State media reported on Saturday that floods in southern Guangxi province in recent weeks caused 5 deaths. A series of heavy rainfall has affected more than 2.34 million people and caused damage in 110 counties in that province.
In the early morning of today, as the water level continued to rise, we promptly transferred the affected residents to safe places. In order to prevent people from straying into danger areas, we have set up a cordon on the embankment. The flood is the biggest one this year, and it has caused the collapse of 4 houses and damaged water conservancy, power supply, communication roads, and other infrastructures. We have evacuated a total of 1,140 people from 273 households.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the south. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported the destruction of a command center in Ukraine, an operation that would have neutralized more than 50 generals and officers. According to the Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov, the attack took place on Saturday in the locality of Shirokaya Dakhya during a meeting of the Alexander Ukrainian Operational Division Command. The meeting was attended by generals and officers of the Ukrainian Army, in particular of the airborne units and troops operating in the southern regions of Zaporizhzhia and Mykolaiv. Konashenkov also reported another caliber attack on a factory in Mykolaiv, which destroyed a dozen 155mm howitzer guns and about 20 armored vehicles recently delivered to Kyiv by the United States. In Sudan, wheat harvest waits to rot as hunger crisis looms. This year, local wheat production was forecast to cover only a quarter of the country's needs, according to UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. The Finance Ministry earlier this month said it was committed to building a strategic wheat reserve of up to 300,000 tons, but the government does not have the funds to buy the harvest, said an official with Sudan's Agriculture Bank, which procures the wheat from farmers. Traders have offered to buy the farmers' wheat, but at far lower prices that barely cover the cost of production. Hundreds of people demonstrated in Tunisia on Sunday in a second day of protest against a constitutional referendum called by President Kais Saied that his opponents say would cement his hold on power. The demonstration was organized by the Salvation Front, a coalition including the moderate Islamist Ennahda, the largest party in parliament that Saied dissolved in March. It followed a similar protest on Saturday called by the Free Constitutional Party over the referendum and a strike on Thursday by a powerful labor union over government economic reform plans, which brought much of the county to a standstill. Said's move heightened accusations at home and abroad that he has consolidated one-man rule after assuming executive powers last summer and setting aside the 2014 constitution to rule by decree.
We are here under one title, which is to stand against the coup and for the restoration of all democracy, which was betrayed by Kais Saied. This is the essence of our system. Any addition to that from solutions and deception under the title of a referendum or a constitution or elections is meaningless.
Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.